Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and thanks from Canada for joining us from wherever you are and whenever it is for you. Today, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and the approach when dealing specifically with critical infrastructure. I'm Mark Dillon, the VP of IT from Waterloo North Hydro, and I have with me uh, Kelley Irwin from ESA. Morning, Kelley.
Good morning, Mark. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Toronto, so I'm enjoying that coming in through the windows as we all sit at home and are managing our teams virtually for the most case in Canada. I am Kelley Irwin, currently CIO at the Electrical Safety Authority, or what we call ESA. And ESA reduces the amount of electricity-related harm across Ontario. We work with all our stakeholders to gain insight and make sure that we continue to keep safety in mind. And I will say we've been busy over the past year with all our normal business activities and also supporting people in Ontario during COVID by setting up temporary or what we call field hospitals, and also manufacturing sites have been set up as we would call pop-up sites to produce PPE supplies to help keep people safe over the past year. So it has certainly been an unusual year for CIOs and security officers.
Yeah, I had no idea that the ESA was involved in that, and we've had some weird things we've had to do ourselves as well. Normally during the day was the time when we would do maintenance and schedule outages, but that's absolutely unacceptable now because everyone's working from home instead of at their offices. So it's kind of put things completely flipped. So let's chat a little bit about what we're talking about here, which is the critical infrastructure and security. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was why is it different? Why is it special, right? Computer's a computer, safety is safety, cybersecurity, cybersecurity. So first of all, when I'm talking about critical infrastructure, what I'm talking about is you want your power to be on, you want your water to be safe to drink, you want your transit systems to work, and all of the networks that make all of that possible are special in a couple ways. So to me, it's the introduction of IoT into our field sites. It's the, is it a computer or not? Who's supposed to, run with it? Is there security or not? Because every time you do that, and we've seen this in medical and health, for example, you're introducing a barrier to the actual worker for the safety of the, protecting against an adversary, but it creates this barrier of entry for actually doing the work. So for me, the big thing here is culture, because someone has to manage something that now has an IP address, but when they started their career, it didn't. And that makes it really tough because that someone isn't just the worker, it's also the manufacturer. And it's also, the whole supply chain. And so the challenges I've seen there mostly has been on the people and process side, to be honest. The technology is a technology, but it is special because you're trying to protect it, but sometimes you start to mess with availability and resiliency in that protection. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it, Mark. And when you say barrier, that word really resonates with me. Um, when I talk to our team, when I talk to our board of directors, and when I'm making decisions, I often get asked, what do I worry about when it comes to cyber? And I always think about the balance. So every decision we make every day to provide IT services and systems for our employees and our external stakeholders, frankly, as quickly as possible with the user in mind, so we don't inhibit their ability to use our services or to do their job. But we need to balance that with the need for stable, secure, scalable solutions. And if we focus only on the user, we may deploy solutions that create a risk, either to our company or to the people in the province. But if we focus only on the security, then we deploy solutions that are so difficult to use that frankly, people will find a workaround and they won't go through the normal path that you're hoping. And so then they'll create a risk that they probably don't understand and that we didn't expect. So when people find that backdoor path, so we talk about how we need to sell our story. And when people ask me, what's different than when you entered the field, what did you not expect? I didn't expect to be in sales in an IT job. And selling that story, why are we doing things, explaining it to people, getting them on board, and doing that in a way that we can still progress quickly. And so that balance every day of, doing what's right, but also keeping people engaged and wanting to support that journey is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, that's another thing that I just thought of it now, but I was talking about the supply chain that's involved. One of the things that happens in critical infrastructure is there's so much legislation for good reason around the protection of the customer and citizens, but what you end up having is pretty territorial vendors because they've been raised in a world that says, thou shall this and that. Then you get some fancy IT person talking to them, wanting, do vulnerability scans. It's like, no, 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 go away. This is legislated by this act, and we don't want you here. But unfortunately, our paths are overlining because yes, they're right, but also that's a computer now.
Yeah, it's a good point you make, and I found in the past couple of companies that I've been at, we have conversations around what is IT. So we say the CIO should sign off on IT purchases, and then we get into these odd conversations that, but this is not really IT. Like we just bought a service, or we bought a software as a service, or we bought a product, and it's not really IT. And your comment earlier about what is a computer. I try to demonstrate it to people when there's data involved that if it's breached could impact our company and hurt our reputation or impact the ability to provide our services, then that's a computer. So, IT needs to be involved and we need to have conversations. On the flip side of that, we need to make sure that our team is responsive and is not saying, okay, you need to follow this 9-month process before you're allowed to, load that app that you're trying to use for productivity. That balance of understanding the business needs, but also getting them to understand why we're interested. It's not just because we're controlling, it's because we are actually trying to help them.
Yeah, and bit by bit, right, to make it so that the business can carry on, we slowly etch these little compromises into our stance, and then that becomes a standing practice, and that still continues. So while you're busy doing that and launching a project and going home at the end of the day, what kinds of things keep you up at night worrying about that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that in the job I'm in now, so I used to work in insurance and banking, and we would look at security more from the view of meeting regulations. So we had OSFI that we had to think about all the time. We had corporate compliance that was, very structured and very well understood, and we had customer satisfaction. So, in a bank, you want to make sure you're doing things the customer cares about, and also that you're meeting your regulations. Working at ESA now and thinking about critical infrastructure and thinking about, power being available to people, it's really changed my mindset around the security we put in place is really helping to support public safety. And it does give you a different view on why you're doing things and how you're doing them. And our nations and our citizens, if you can say it, sort of holistically rely on the critical infrastructure that we provide, not only for their economic stability, but in many cases for their lives. And so we think about when things go wrong, what happens, and we all think about our day-to-day issues. Oh, I lost my power and I can't do what? I can't log on. I can't watch TV. I can't have light to read. I can't everyone yells, don't open the refrigerator, we're saving power while there's an outage. Day-to-day comforts, if we could say it that way. But we have to remember some people are relying on electricity for their life. And those people could be in the hospital on machines. Those people could have some kind of power needs in their home for things that they're using for their safety and for their health. And so it really does make us think about the reason we do these jobs, and the reason that we're protecting the services that we provide is not just for convenience, but is for health and life.
Yeah, I'm completely with you there. That's exactly what worries me, right? I mean, there's the selfish part where you just worry about your own security and your livelihood. But when you think deeper, it's really about the systems that I may not even be aware of that totally depend on this. So, a simple example is um, we had a situation a few years back where someone had decided that they were quite unwell and unhappy, and they climbed a hydro pole, essentially maybe to kill themselves. So it was a large transformer station, and we had to, this is a different location. We had to kill power to the whole town basically, or a section of it, to make this safe enough. And while we're negotiating the safety of this person, getting them down from where they are, you know, cell phone stopped working. Everyone thinks, oh, if there's an outage, I'll be able to use my cell phone. But the cell phone towers that were near us, they had about 3 hours life. That was it. And then the next thing that goes is water towers aren't around anymore. People use underground water pumps. So those are electric, and water stops too. And so it's not just one thing. And there's a whole cascading effect, right? What else breaks when there isn't water? What else breaks when there isn't cellular? And there's this system cascade of failure that is probably going to put people's lives at risk in a shorter period of time than we think. So making sure that something that we're building because we want to have a new comfort, like you talked about, doesn't create a disruption that breaks that baseline. And that's what I'm probably most worried about. We haven't seen, I don't think, in Canada, a real either cyber or technology resilience incident that's taken down, a substantial grid. I haven't seen a blackout since, what was it, 2003? But we know it's coming, right? The more we're putting this stuff in there, there's going to be something, and practicing to respond to it's important. But that is what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and your comment about the grid is an important thing for us to think about. And, the recent issues that happened in Texas around their ability to have electricity available have shown us the dependency of humans, on these services we provide. And that wasn't a cyber attack; it was a weather impact, but it did show, sort of the fragility of these services we have. And there are certain areas, especially across North America, where there's sharing of electricity. So if one area, has lost their power, there's ways to share it. But Texas happens to be on their own grid, and they're not sharing with other states or other areas. So, if it was a cyber attack, there would be no way in that moment to help them. And also, I think that your comment, we haven't seen a major attack on the grid. Um, there's there's like what's happening in front of us, and then there's what's happening behind the scenes. And so that, if you ask me what keeps me up at night, it's what has penetrated our environment that we don't know yet. So what is sort of that um, silent threat that we should be thinking about? And on that, I think about the recovery side of it. So we may not be able to always prevent something from happening, but we need to make sure that all of our systems and services and our plans include that recovery from aspect. What will we do in the event this happens? What will we do at the time that it happens? Who do we have to notify? And it's not just the technology component. There is the communication and the reputation. And I think that all companies, not just critical infrastructure, think about that trust relationship that they have with their customers. And once your customers lose trust in you for whatever the service is you're providing, whether it's critical infrastructure, whether it's your financial stability, whether it's your insurance products, or whether it's just products you're purchasing that you believe you can get them at the time you need them and have them delivered to where you have requested, once you lose that trust, it's hard to get it back. So a lot of companies, I would say, CIOs and security officers think about that. Like, what are we doing to instill that trust and to maintain that trust?
Yeah, and it's funny how little, like as a customer, for example, I would be very uninformed, and I almost wouldn't think about it. But the second that there is a mistake, or even a headline of a mistake that isn't unfounded, my whole opinion is now warped for years. So reputation and relationship with customers is really important, and a lot of the critical infrastructure companies are in the territory of government enforced monopoly, like there's only one choice, right? We don't shop around for customers. You were born here or you weren't. And it's because the infrastructure is so invasive. It's either dangerous or underground, and it just makes sense that it's municipally or provincially run. But then that creates an interesting relationship with the customer because they can't shop around. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so to that actually, for people who wouldn't be familiar, what's a day in the life of Kelly like, and how much of that is security? What is it like when you get to work, and what do you do, and where does the security part of that fit into you? Because I assume security reports to you.
Yes, it does. It does, of course. Yeah, and it's a good question. I think the security aspect is always front of mind. It may not be the primary focus of a conversation, but it's always at least the secondary focus. So any system that we're implementing, any system that we're fixing or upgrading, we do need to keep that in mind and think about it. And I would say 20 years ago, the security aspect was almost after the fact. Like you would plan a project, you would put systems in, you would then go to the security officer and say, are you good with this? And almost like, sign off, please. And now we bring the security officer in at the beginning of a project and we say, what should we think about and what should we care about before we go down this road so that we don't get to the last moment and then blame the security officer for trying to hold up the project, which is words that we used to use 20 years ago, like security and compliance. They're just trying to stop us from doing things. And now, they're really part of the team and part of the conversation and part of the strategy. So in my day-to-day life, I find when we have conversations about security and especially the breaches that have happened, when it's not in your company, it's always an interesting story to learn from. Um, and even having conversations at the board of directors, I find I have to be careful how far I go into the conversation because people get actually quite energized by stories about cyber. And even when I talk about things like the latest phishing style of attack, here's something to be aware of, and here's something to make sure that you're educating your family and your own companies on. People love to tell you, I got one of those emails, this is what happened, and this is how I knew it was fake. And I'm always energized to think that all of our employees and all of our board directors feel like they're part of the cyber team now because they're able to identify things and they'll say things to me like, they didn't catch me, I knew it was spam. And I just feel really energized by that because I would say even a couple of years ago, people didn't want to talk about it. They're like, stop telling us, we got it, we did our security training, why do you keep harping on this? And so, really security is part of the day-to-day conversations and people understand the impact. I think most people now have witnessed something that's either impacted the industry they're in or has impacted, a personal friend of theirs. So they're more open to the conversation as long as we put that frame of reference why we're talking about it. So Mark, in your
Yeah.
day, like, would you say you uh, sort of bring this forward or people bring it to you more often?
So it's like you said, there's a almost don't hold me up relationship there. Now we aren't there anymore either, or at least there's a veneer of us promising that we're not. But the truth is that making something safe makes it harder to use. It's not it's an inverse relationship. So if there's something that we all need to use and then I lock it in a box and I have to go find the key, well, that's annoying, right? And if the key is complicated and incomprehensible to you, then it gets even harder. And then you start to find workarounds, right? You start saying, well, I don't really need what's in that box. I'll store it over here instead. It'll be mostly correct. And these are the workarounds you're talking about, right? So it's and in a big way, it's kind of like COVID. So if you're managing this pandemic restrictions and you're the government, and believe me, I'm glad I'm not, because how hard that would be. You have, the citizens' willingness to be compliant with what seems like a reasonable restriction, and then you have the health, and they do this, right? So the more you tell people to be safe, the less they start to follow the rules because it just is cumbersome. They're just trying to get their job done. And I think a good example is there was a story recently about a water plant in Florida that was compromised, and it was done so for exactly this reason. So I would hope this wouldn't happen, but it totally could happen to me. All large companies have silos, and a silo of this municipality um, wanted to get some work done on their HMI, their human management interface for their water plant. And it was probably tough to talk to IT, and IT was busy and whatever, fine. We'll just install a VNC viewer. IT doesn't want to open the VNC. That's weird. Fine. We'll just hook it directly up to the internet. No problem. And we'll leave it open, and that's fine. And oh well, it's got a default password. It's going to be for a short period of time, but then you forget to close it, or whatever happened, right? The fine details weren't really published, but I've definitely, when working in municipalities and so forth, taking a trip over, I'll introduce myself. Well, hey, how come that has a TeamViewer installed on it? Or how come that has Real VNC? Oh, that's how our, supplier gets in. Oh, okay. Well, are they using a No, no, they just connect. So those kinds of things are set up because of the know people, right? And in my day-to-day job, one of the things I try to do is, advertise that I'm not a no person and let people explain how things are working. Because even if I don't like it, you kind of got to watch yourself because you have that, oh, stop that hesitancy inside of you. But what that tells that person that you're working with is, oh, don't talk to Mark. He's just going to shut things down.
Yeah.
So there's this balancing act, right? And it's with all the competing priorities of many projects and day-to-day operations, and then, oh, we'll worry about that security thing. There's still a little bit of it being an afterthought, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that people, when they hear about a breach, even in my family, we'll be sitting at a dinner and someone goes, "Did you hear about a breach? How could that happen? How could that happen in this day and age?" I'm like, "Oh my God, I can tell you how it could happen."
Yeah.
We can't be everywhere seeing everything. That's why educating our employees and bringing people along that journey is important. That being able to play defense and being prepared for something that does happen, again, I'll say that's extremely important. And then learning from things that have happened to other companies so that we can understand where we could do something different or where we may be exposed. Um, I also think the opportunity for employees to bring things into the company that they don't even understand have caused a threat is so great these days. And when I started in my current job, so I've been at ESA for about 2 years, and in my first week, it's a real like people company, and so virtual meetings and virtual work has really hit our company hard because we were such a in-person, face-to-face kind of culture. And I came from large corporations where everything was scheduled and everything was a meeting. And so you never sort of met anyone in the hallway unless you were getting a coffee. You would always schedule something. I'll see you next Thursday. I'll see you in a month. And so I came to this company, and in my first week, I met about 100 people. They dropped by my office. They told me who they were. They told me what was important, and they told me what they needed from IT. And so there's this one guy, and I told him he will be famous in my life because he came in my office the first week 3 times. I don't know if he knew that I would remember that it was the same guy, or he thought he would maybe make me think it was 3 different stories. But he came in and said, "I need to buy an app." And I was like, "Nice to meet you." Like, who are you and what app do you need? Right. And so we got to a really great relationship over a couple of weeks. It took a while, but I got him to what are we trying to accomplish? Don't tell me what app you need, because he started with, "I need to buy an app, and they won't let me unless you sign off on it." Okay, what's the app? What's the company? What do you know about this company? Well, my friend uses it at another organization, right? That's what he knew about the app.
Yeah.
When we looked into it, the app had like very limited security. I did not allow it to come into the company. We solved his business need in another way. But had I just simply either agreed with him, I would have brought a risk into the company, or just turned him away because this was a, sort of ludicrous request. I would have turned him off. And to your point, he probably would have gone and found a way to sneak that into it. So it is building those partnerships and showing like, I want to help you meet your business need, but let's talk about what that need is, not about what the technology is. So you must get those requests on a frequent basis too, where people already have the answer.
Yeah. Here's the solution I have. What's the problem? No, no, I already solved that. Just let's do this. And sometimes, so the way I deal with that is, it's not that I don't agree with your conclusion, just walk me through the math so I can understand. And often during that conversation, once they're saying it out loud, they may even go down the correct path and change their mind just by explaining it to me.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things you mentioned was the big difference between that, large corporate private business culture, see you next month when we have a meeting again, and where you are now, where it's, more like a um, friends and family style, like knowing everybody. So how is that between your old life and your new position? What are the differences when it comes to cybersecurity and managing it?
Yeah, I've found that I'm able to have a more personal impact with these people and really talk about cyber from a view of it. It's not what I'm trying to do to the organization, but what I'm trying to do for the organization. And so when you can have those conversations more on a personal basis and touch more people individually, it's easier to influence that. I would say that. Talking to them about the value, why we're doing what we're doing, and how it will help people, not just the employees, but also our external stakeholders. And that if we do it right, it will last for a long time, as opposed to if we go too quickly, we may put something in place that we regret or that causes problems or that we'll have to replace in the future. So being able to have that more maybe personal impact. And we've also gamified some of our security training. And, as I said earlier, I have people who they will literally send me emails and say, they didn't catch me. Look, here's one. And I knew it was wrong because you told me, Kelley, that, if I check
Mm-hmm.
this, I check the email address, if I check, and I'm like, okay, I don't actually need you to send me an email to tell me that you noticed it was spam, but okay. And so I respond to every one of those and I'm like, you're awesome. Like
They want a
this.
leaderboard.
Yeah, exactly. So like I look at it that if every person feels they're part of the cybersecurity team, then we're really doing our job right. That they feel that they're that last line of defense, that we've told them cyber counts on everyone to do their job and that they're taking it seriously. And in a large corporation, that's a bit harder. I found in large companies, people did it because they had to. People took their training because they got a tick mark on their HR file, and people wanted to be compliant because they didn't want to be on an exception report. But I'm finding at this company that maybe it's partly the size, partly the familiarity of people, but also partly the mandate that their mandated ESA is about public safety, and so we tie that into cyber safety.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. So I think the big differences I've seen, and I haven't worked in private sector since Y2K. In the pseudo private sector of Canadian energy, um, we're very much close to the public sector as far as mandate goes. And as I've floated around a couple of those, the things they have in common is that your goal is to run a responsible business that does good community investment and makes the community better. The differences between them have been the leadership. So the styles of leadership I've seen in companies like this one vary on a spectrum of, how much faith-based IT is it? So when you have that breach moment and you're sitting down, there's kind of two conversations that are going to happen. One is, I thought you said we were safe, and I don't want to have that one. The other one is, that's right. I remember when we made that compromise and accepted that risk. Looks like that was a mistake. That's the conversation I want to have the day after the breach. And that's where I try to get things. And I honestly think that the that our sectors are more primed to be able to set enough time aside to be in a position to have that conversation, meaning that they thought about it, they cared about it, because there's not a lot of motivation to be secure. Like you said, it's compliance, right? It's only don't have that bad moment, don't have that reputation damage, etc. But if your company builds in safety as one of its mandates, then that's one of these that we have safety as one of our things. Obviously, people work on high power lines, they work in dangerous situations, but we've wrapped cybersecurity in as one of our safety components, and that makes it part of our mandate, which is really refreshing because it's no longer that no person. It's no longer the okay, the project's done, but now let's put a bow on it and make it secure. It's part of the way that we do the work, even in the building of new things, because safety is part of our core mandate. So for me, that's a big difference. And partly I think that might just be our evolution as things go forward in general. All companies are starting to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the
Yeah.
things that's inside of all this is we both have supply chains that are very long. And what what do you do for your supply chain? How do you consider security inside of that?
That's probably the $1 million question, right? And I think that, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I actually do, I wouldn't say I lose sleep over it, but I sort of ponder that, like, am I thinking broad enough? So I can think about the overall mandate of IT at ESA. I can think about the overall portfolio of services that we provide. You know, we do a lot of operational reports like everyone, you know, what's our uptime? What's our rate of tickets that are coming in for system problems? Like we're analyzing data all the time. But what are we not seeing? And so, you know, if you have five different vendor products that are all working together and they all be working excellent from a view of stability, scalability, and security, right? They may individually, when you integrated them into your environment, you did a lot of analysis on them and confirmed that they meet your needs. But did we do enough analysis on the whole? Did we do enough analysis? Does this vendor product and this vendor product work well together and play well together so that they don't create a breach situation between them? So it's, I think, something that I do spend a lot of time thinking about. And I'm not saying that we don't take any action on it, but I do worry about, we spend a lot of time up front as we're integrating new systems and services and vendors and products and service offerings to our customers. But do we continue to challenge ourselves and ask the questions again and again? Because as we all know, any product can be great when you first implement it. It doesn't mean it's great for the rest of your life. And so I think about even, you know, products in your home, take it away from a cyber view for a minute. You know, your car or your dishwasher or things, like, of course you did your sort of research when you were buying these things, but what are you doing to maintain them and make sure that they're still the right thing for your, you know, personal needs in that situation? The same with, you know, business needs. How often do we take our entire portfolio of IT and deconstruct it to see that it's still the right thing and see that it's still safe and secure end to end? And
Yeah, I feel like I should be taking notes, and I've got some work to do after we're done talking.
maybe that's our next consulting gig, Mark, after. But yeah, I think that end to end view. And if we look at, you know, what happens in certain breaches, it's not necessarily a system that got breached um, for the service it was supposed to be providing. It sometimes gets breached through, you know, a backdoor of a different service. And the one that always stuck with me was it, I won't even say which chain, but large store chain that got breached through their uh, HVAC unit.
That was Home Depot.
So we don't think about these things, right? I mean, I don't mean that no one thinks about them, but when you're implementing a solution or a system, we need to think about everything that's touching it or could touch it, everything that's on your network, and how it could be the, you know, single point of failure that causes the demise.
Oh yeah, like one of the things that has happened to me in most places I've gone to is a storage disaster, and let's redo the wiring. And every time I've touched either of those things, it's always, well, what the heck is this thing? Oh, that's for our building automation system, or that's for our camera system. And well, why is it plugged in here? And why is it this 20-year-old router? And why is that? Where does this cable go? Like, that's literally a conversation every single time. And it always uncovers the, well, the person showed up to install this thing and they needed a network jack, and they had this, you know, proprietary device they brought in that needs to talk in a special way, that needs exemptions on our network. So we plugged it into this special port for that device. And like, that's so common that it's, I
Hmm.
don't like, I'm sure you've seen the exact same thing. And with all of the pressures and work, you make these sort of exemptions for it. And what you should really be asking yourself when it's supply chain is, who touched that thing and what did they do to it? You're hooking it up to my network. What is it? Who made it? What's it going to do? And the sad truth is that, if you go to Best Buy and buy a computer, no one can answer that question. If you're buying an HP computer, even HP can't tell you, what the ingredients were that went into making that system, because it's multiple companies made individual components that got assembled into a thing that the company that made it isn't even selling it, and it's been to multiple countries. So
Yeah.
you have this supply chain is, I think about it acutely every now and then in sort of a, manic, like, okay, I need to worry about this. And
And then
then,
you're off to another meeting, and then yeah,
yeah, exactly.
where does it fit in, right? I have a story for you. This was one that stuck with me. It's many years ago now, but I was visiting one of our sites for a company I worked at in the Philippines, and so I was in the computer center. We were looking at the overall computer center and whether we should outsource components of it or not. So we were diving really deep into what all the components were, what the services were, what the vendors were that were involved or not involved, and it was pretty tightly managed. I felt like they were doing a very good job, but then you just ask questions similar to what you said about, who touched it, what were they doing with it, and why. And so I was sitting there, and this funny question came to my mind. I'm talking to the manager of the data center, and I say to him, so you're the manager of like the day shift? And he goes, no, I'm the manager of the overall data center. I said, oh, that's awesome. So it was a 724, it was all on-prem. And
Hmm.
I said, so who manages at night when you go home? And he said, I do. And I'm like, well, this is a very interesting point. I don't know what to ask next, right? So I said, how do you manage at night? Like, how do you know? I don't want to say your workers aren't good and ethical, but how do you know they're doing their job at night? And he said, I have a camera in my house. And so he shows me in the data center the camera up in the corner that is watching the workers. And when he's at home at night, he's getting up in the middle of the night to check his camera at home to see that they're doing their job. So a whole bunch of
Wow.
thought came to my mind on that. But from a cyber thought, I thought, how do we know your home is secure and that now you've
Yeah.
now created this breach of data access that a security officer in the corporate office would never think I need to go to the manager's house to
Hmm.
see how secure he is, right? So these back doors that we don't know people are putting in place, to me, the thing that worries me that we need to uh, put more controls around, but know what we're causing. Because in that case, we would have caused, they would have to hire another manager, right? A night manager, which
Hmm.
may or may not have been the right answer at that time.
Yeah, that's that's the whole, resiliency discussion. So, do you need your backups from last night or 15 minutes ago? And how many companies have been saved because, and it is more than one in my personal experience, because the tech decided, well, I'll just bring the tapes home at night because you don't have a place to put them. Like that's literally saved some companies bacon before, and it's terrible and great. But did that camera and connection to the data center for that camera actually improve or make things worse as far as an overall security portfolio goes?
Yeah. Yeah. And people are doing what they believe is the right thing in those situations. That's not even talking about the threats that are intentional, right?
So you mentioned a little bit about what was happening, but sorry, as far as what your differences were between your old and current place. But what really shocked you or was eye-opening to you when in your new job where you currently are, you said, "Oh, okay, that's different."
Yeah, I would say, thinking about cyber from a different view and thinking about um, how an attack, whether it was an internal attack or whether it's, from external bad actors of any sort, um, how how they could actually impact the well-being of people. And so really putting that lens on it at all times of the service we're providing. While I worked in banking for a long time and insurance for a long time, and those services are extremely important to us. I don't want to take away from that. If I go to the bank and they say, sorry, you can't get your money till tomorrow, I'm going to be, quite frankly, very irritated. But it's not going to, impact my life in that moment. I'm not at threat of, physical harm.
Hmm.
Uh, if it went on a long time, that would, change things if no one had any money and couldn't transact. But the fact that it's the well-being of people that could be impacted, in a minute or in 10 minutes or in an hour, depending on what they're counting on those services from critical infrastructure to provide them, and how we're fragile as a country, especially I would say in Canada, maybe different levels in different countries, but we are so dependent on our electrical services. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think about when we did have an ice storm and we lost power for 3 days at my house. And we were like, what do we do? There was like almost this awakening of, we weren't at physical harm, but we felt completely unequipped to deal with this outage. We didn't know, what's the next step you do? How long will this last? And, how many people went out to their car and charged up their phone, like, oh my God, we need our phone. What do you need your phone for? But it's that mental shift of the dependency on these services that we have. And for anyone who's had their water shut off, or, the neighborhood to do some work, or their electricity shut off, or their gas shut off, we sort of go into a little bit of mindset panic. Like, what am I supposed to do without this essential service? And it's not life threatening in that moment to someone like me, but it is to other people.
Yeah, I mean, there was never a food shortage here in this area, but I literally couldn't find toilet paper for about 3 weeks. And it's exactly that, right? There's this thing I took for granted, and now it's seems to be short of supply. One of the things you talked about was the idea that there's sort of, you know, very urgent things, and then like power being out, there's the bank can't give me money, so that's okay for, a week or two. And so companies like the one I work at are kind of three companies. We've got field work, labor outside, tactical, on the poles and wires, very high urgency, right? That's the kind of thing that will affect someone the same day you do it. You got the administrative wing, which is sort of the accounts payable, accounts receivable, HR, IT, all that stuff, where, maybe that matters in the timeline of a month or so. You've got our engineering and design people that are, planning out subdivisions and new builds and replacements. We're talking 1 to 3 years of timeline here. And each of these groups actually have separate cultures and have separate work conditions. And one of the things we're seeing that's bridging them together is we're seeing some automation technologies come in. So we have some fancy stuff, what's called FLISR. I think it stands for fault location interruption service restoration. The idea is that when I was a kid and the power went out, it'd probably be an hour. Now it's
Yeah.
1 or 2 seconds, and everyone, we kind of take that for granted. And the reason is because you've got a subdivision downline from a power source, but actually two power sources. One of them's open, one of them's closed. Something happens over here. Honestly, it's usually a squirrel. Does this? Oh, still okay. All right, there you go. So it closes it like that. And what ends up happening is you have this automated restoration of power faster than a person could even decide to pick up a phone to send a truck there to repair it. There's still a truck going there to repair it, but this automation has allowed us to have a much faster restoration. But maybe it's introduced some risk, right? Maybe it's like the camera at that guy's house, where it's great 99% of the time, but for that 1%, it does more damage than the rest.
Yeah.
See
I
anything
think,
like that in your industry?
yeah, I would say we're looking at all kinds of automation. We're looking at all kinds of integration, and, there's public-private collaboration. There's automation of services that we use. And I think of it this way, if I could use an example from the medical field, like, there are a lot of things that can be done with AI to diagnose people. But there's always that moment where a human review of that information is important, because there's nuances, or there are aspects that maybe are not in the data, right? So those aspects could be something that the patient didn't tell anyone, or that doesn't show up in, the blood tests or the screening tests or things like that. And so I think about that when we think of automation for things that can be done. I'll give an example for our company. We're looking at photo integration. So how can we do inspections of sites using photos or videos instead of an inspector actually going there and looking at something? So there's a really good debate going on right now. So part of it, you go, yeah, if I need to see the electrical panel and know that it's been configured properly and that the wires have been hooked in properly, I can probably see that through a video. So I could have the electrician at the other end, do the video, or or even be on a live FaceTime or something like that and showing, and then the inspector could be somewhere else asking questions. Wait, could you move it over? I need to see the red wire. And theoretically, that all makes sense. What we need to keep in mind is the people who are doing their job right. So that electrician who's doing his job right, he's going to show you what he's done. He's going to be proud of it, and you're going to be able to see that it's been done properly. For someone who's trying to cut corners, for someone who's trying to get away with something, they may have the part that's not configured properly hidden, right? They may have something over it, or maybe hold the angle of the camera in a different way. So that's where I go, the automation is possible, but is it enough? And so we need to connect all of this automation with, human intelligence and human oversight in the right way, so that it stays financially viable for the company and for the customer, and also that we're still remembering what is our main goal, which is to maintain public safety.
Right.
So
Yep.
if we went to, all photo evidence instead of in-person evidence, and all of a sudden we have a spike of people having harm from electricity, then we would know we went too far. But you don't want that to happen. Like, you want to approach it incrementally, so you don't find the break point and have to come back from it.
So one of the things that throughout my career has kind of shocked me each step of the way is the combination of how much more vast this career path is than I thought it was going to be, but also how much more kind of Mickey Mouse it is everywhere. And like an example would be, I started as a Y2K programmer. And so, I'm theoretically solving problems in my head, coding and so forth. And I'm all fascinated by the technology for the technology's sake. And I think it's beautiful and, clean. And I fell in love with technology at a young age. So I show up and I'm like, what do you mean you used 2 digits? That's this problem? Like, that's the problem? And I think, well, why did you do that? And then I show up at other places and it's like, well, so we've got, 4 people to deal with 600 staff and 20 buildings. Who decided that? What do you mean you want me to cut my budget? So those things happen. And then I see, private sector sometimes, and I think, wow, you have like 30 people for a 100-person company. That's amazing. And so maybe there's some, and I've seen attempts, but I was thinking maybe there's some ability where we can work together with the profit motivated private companies to help improve community good. I've seen, PR and vanity projects around it, but something with some real substantial impact. I haven't had the pleasure of being involved in that yet. Have you seen anything like that?
I have seen that a bit, where there's, I'll say, startup companies who are trying to do something that is for public good, and a public company with deep pockets who's funding them to get some of that research off the ground. I think that 20, 30, 40 years from now, that will be very common. Right now, your comment about vanity projects, I think that's part of it. I also think that when big companies get involved and they're funding that research, a bit of it is, playing in this sandbox and feeling innovative and agile. Big corporations love to say these words.
Mm-hmm.
And also then, once it gets to a point where it's viable product and it's potentially going to take off, wanting to bring it back into the big corporation so that the other corporations don't get it. So I think that we're seeing, startups and innovative small companies who want to actually maintain their IP and maintain their focus on their goal as opposed to big corporations' goal. I sort of reflect on how that's a bit like musicians maybe 50 years ago didn't want to sell the rights to their song, even though they knew if they did, short term they would make good money, long term they would lose any power or authority or decision rights over that. So, in my head, that's sort of like the new frontier of these technology pioneers is, no, I want to keep control of this so I can keep doing the good with it that I'm trying. And I was reading this article recently about a small company. I think it might have been in your area, around Waterloo, Cambridge area, who is developing this app that will help pharmacies as they're rolling out the COVID vaccine to ensure that their refrigeration stays stable enough that they never compromise any of the vaccines they're given. And so I look at that as, a really awesome example of, you have a, big pharma going to issue these vaccines and make lots of money, in their way. And this small company going, we want to help because we don't want this product to be wasted by, a small blip in the refrigeration. And where will that go? I don't know, right? We'll be watching a lot of these small entrepreneur companies to see, do they get to stand firm on their goal of really just helping humans?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there's the other thing I was thinking about is that maybe there's an opportunity to provide more visibility into what we do. So to some extent, public services are not on purpose, but they seem secretive because they don't have a lot of time. So there was the whole, I'm going to call it the open data fad, where everyone had a CSV file you could download, but it wasn't even accurate data most of the time because who has the time to clean that up? There's a few efforts. There's actually an open electricity grid map, for example, where you can actually see all the power flowing from everywhere, which is pretty neat. I think engaging our customers more might actually help bring some attention to this. And so I assume that you like your job, right? So I love my job, honestly. And for you, what is it that's fun about all this? What's fun about managing cybersecurity and IT and
Yeah, I mean, you said it a bit earlier, solving problems. I love to solve problems. And I also think IT, IT changes people's lives. It can, change it good or bad, depending on how you're looking at it. But it's you're not doing today what you did 20 years ago in IT. And people 20 years from now won't be doing what we're doing. But the foundation of solving problems and being able to put solutions in place and helping people will always be there. And whether it's for critical services, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's just for day-to-day living, everyone touches IT. And I was giving advice to a friend of mine who's he was trying to get his two daughters into IT. So I was doing some mentoring and coaching, and one of them was, quite open, and one of them was not. And she wanted to go into being a fitness trainer, and I said to her, okay, you don't want to go into IT. It's very clear your career path is, far diverged from that. But think of the term, you want to touch IT. Like, you don't want to be in IT, but you want to touch it, because your customers will expect that there will be some kind of technology solution in the service you provide them, even as a fitness trainer. So whether that's that they're going to have wearable technologies to, check their heart rate or check their amount of activity in a day, or whether they're going to want, some kind of graph to show their progress, like, they're going to want technology to be part of the solution. So it's a, awesome career. It's completely different than what we thought when we got into it, but it's also going to keep changing like that. So I think for people to embrace it and use it in the way that's best for them, will open up lots of avenues. What do you like the most?
honestly, it that moment of rapid decision making, which happens planning and implementation, or even in an incident response scenario. So dealing with problems that need to be solved, and they just need to be solved, which means that it drops away the analysis paralysis of perfectionism, because you just need to do it. And that moment, so the my connection to technology is actually very close to, I don't know, did you there's Edward Snowden wrote a book recently, and it's called Permanent Record. And in the first couple chapters, he talks about his life growing up, and I'm kind of around the same age as him. And it's the similar memories around being exposed to computers and tech as a separate world, a sort of very different world. And it's so much a part of our lives now, but it's that exact sort of magic connection feeling that you have with it, almost like it's a type of art. And actually, I see you've got a book behind you. What's that about?
Yeah, so I wrote a book with my co-author called Please Stay, How Women in Tech Survive and Thrive. And really, we started talking about how women are getting into tech, but then women are leaving tech. So the numbers of women joining tech are rising, but the total number of women in tech is not rising at all. So we're losing them, as fast as we're gaining them. So
Did you come to a conclusion in there that, here's the main reason?
there are many reasons, but uh, sort of the top three reasons are that women don't feel they're being sort of valued for the contribution they're bringing to the table. They don't feel they have coaches and mentors and supporters to help them get through those hard times. And then also they're not being promoted and given the opportunities that they see the men are being given, and for lots of different reasons, either because of visibility or because of the numbers. If there are 10 people at the table and 9 are men, then 9 of the opportunities are going to be given to them. So, yeah, our next venture is to try to get young women to embrace tech before they even make career choices, and not as a gamer, right?
Yeah, so I've seen a positive rise in the amount of peers and mentors I have that are women. Maybe it hasn't been long enough yet for me to see that drop off, or maybe just my industry, we're lucky in it and I don't see it as much. But I mean, it's a remarkable positive change because it changes the environment in a way that's just better. And there's different types of thinking, and I it's certainly different than it was, when I started as that. What do you mean you had 2 digits instead of 4?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think, sort of my last thought I'll give, as I reflect on all the things that we enjoy about tech, because there's what the company needs, and then there's the personal enjoyment is for me, and I probably wouldn't say this to my teams when they're in the throes of it, but when we're implementing something new, that moment right before you know it'll work, so that moment where you're questioning and you think, are we okay? Did we test enough? Do we know what we're doing? And there's that sort of anxiety and your blood pressure is going up. I love that moment because it's like, the breakthrough's coming, but you're not there yet. And that's what hooked me when I was 20, is that
Right.
moment
Yep.
thinking that you can't do it, and then you do.
Yeah, that moment when you take theoretical and turn it into practical, and then you say it works. There is nothing better than that moment. I'm completely with you.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion, and maybe at some point in the future we'll get to work together on something and have that moment together.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. And maybe see each other in person
Well, we
when
can
we're
only
allowed.
hope. Okay,
Great.
I think I'm actually going to check your book out, and thanks for sharing that with us.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, thanks everybody for tuning in and having this chat with us, and Kelly and I are going to get back to making the world safe for all of you.